Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome your moderator, journalist and co-anchor at CNBC, David Faber.
Thank you. Thank you, and thank you all for being here, and thanks to our panel. We're going to get right into it, I think. Each of them can sort of introduce themselves to a certain extent or what their businesses are about, but our topic is the future of finance. And I think you'll find that each of our panelists has a particular view in terms of their industry and their expertise on where things are going, but we also think that there's going to be some unifying themes that we start with. And one of them, I think, in many ways, may end up being data, which I'm sure a lot of you have heard about. Each of you approach it somewhat differently, but it's incredibly important in each of your businesses. And why don't we just start with you, Mike? If you want to also introduce yourself as well, that might be helpful. And then let's sort of try and approach this subject of data in terms of how it's changing your business, how you use it, and how you believe it will, or you will continue to use it.
Sure. So I'm Mike Cagney. I'm one of the co-founders and CEO of SoFi. And SoFi is the largest non-bank consumer lender in the US. We use data very extensively from an underwriting standpoint. I think one of the things that I found amazing as we were building our underwriting algorithms was with 5 pieces of data, your name, your address, your date of birth, where you went to school, and what you make, we can do one of the most comprehensive underwriting assessments, accessing hundreds of thousands, sometimes millions of pieces of data to do an instantaneous decision for credit. And it was an interesting experience that we had that it happened so quickly. Literally, by the time you press the button, we already know whether you get a loan or not. That when we would reject people, they didn't actually believe we were underwriting them. Thought that we were just simply capturing their data and trying to steal it. And so we created a fake 15-second timer that would spin when you were going to get rejected. And it made it look like we tried really hard and we just couldn't get there. People like that a lot better. So people don't want an instant rejection. They want you to think 15 seconds before you say no. But I think what's most interesting to me as we look at what we do, some of it's coming out of the need for speed and efficiency and access to technology. Some of it's coming out of the regulatory pressure. So there's so much regulatory pressure from disparate treatment, disparate impact, that if you have the old subjective underwriting approach, you're subject to risks that you don't need to take as a business. And so making it purely electronic, instantaneous algorithm, you basically become blind to your applicant, and that addresses some of the regulatory concerns that are out there.
It's, Brian, interesting. Regulatory, obviously, is also an important component of what you do at Credit Suisse overall. And when we've been talking and preparing for this, you've discussed as well sort of compliance specific to regulation and how that is changing in terms of how you approach it and how AI even figures into it.
Yeah, absolutely. And just by way of introduction, I'm Brian Chin, and I run the Global Markets Division at Credit Suisse, which encompasses fixed income and equity sales and trading in the main. I think, David, what you're referring to is discussion we were having kind of prior to coming in here around how we're using data in our compliance effort. And as a bank, we have a tremendous amount of data, whether it's our client info, our employee info, flow info, and I frankly think we've just barely started to scratch the surface of its potential and figure out how to kind of use it. But I think what you're referring to is on the compliance side, like every bank, we have some traders that don't always do what they're supposed to be doing, the quote-unquote rogue traders. Thankfully, we've had much smaller numbers, much smaller kind of losses from these types of traders over the years. But usually they come out after the fact, and we usually remediate them and terminate and handle them as such. But last year, we actually, in partnership with Palantir, gave all our data to them on all our employee kind of trading activity and everything that encompasses it. And we didn't give them the names of the people who were kind of the bad actors, and they actually found all the bad actors. And this was data from their trading patterns, from when they swiped into the building that day, to when they logged into their computers. And so we're just really scratching the surface in terms of using that data to help us, from a compliance perspective, kind of weed out some of the bad actors within the bank. And I think multiple banks, every bank's probably doing something similar.
So what's your reaction when you get that kind of, I would assume, positive end result there? Are you going to re-up with Palantir? Are there new systems that you're putting in place somehow that are going to act on what they were able to find?
So we are working on trying to develop our systems as well as look to kind of outsource some of our data mining activity to them. We're working on that with them. I think for us it just makes us feel like if we can get this right, we can run a much more compliant kind of business and actually run it with a better bottom line. Just given that looking at the data, you can prevent these things from happening as opposed to reacting them after the fact.
Igor, your business obviously depends on data and getting a lot of it. What do you do with it? And again, if you could just explain who you are and what WorldQuant is.
Way of introduction, I'm Igor Tulchinsky. I'm the CEO of WorldQuant, a private institutional quantitative money management complex with 600 plus employees and 20 offices in 15 countries in the world. And data is our bloodline. We take data and we turn it into algorithms, and we turn the algorithms into strategies, and strategies into profits, usually. And we find data is growing exponentially, and not only do we consume data, we produce data, and we produce data that we later can consume, and this is a cycle that is likely to continue, and it's a key competitive advantage to be able to digest these ever-increasing amounts of data.
Is it an art to identify new sources of data?
It's an art, and it's a process as well. We have a whole team of people devoted to doing that, to going out to people, to locating the data, and to testing the data and making sure it's useful to us. Because, as we like to say, every company is a data company, and furthermore, every individual is in many ways a data company. And we want all the data we can get.
I know Farley's got a bunch for you if you want to use it potentially. Louise, is PayPal a data company too?
I think you can't be in this space unless you have data. Louise Pentland, I'm the Chief Business Affairs Officer at PayPal. I think data can be a curse and a blessing. I think certainly a company like PayPal, we collect probably more data than a lot of financial services companies, because obviously we also have peer-to-peer, we have social aspects to what PayPal does. So we have a lot of data. And I think the trick is always how do you leverage that, and how do you keep that true to the mission of the company. And for PayPal, democratizing financial services is at the core of what we do. And I think one of the examples that I'll share that I think is one of the real benefits of both how you have data and how you keep it true to your mission and your vision is our working capital model. Because if you are a small business entrepreneur, a business owner, you may have had a PayPal account for many, many years, and you may be setting up a business, or you may have a business. And because we have a history with you, and because we see what comes into your account, what's in your business account, we've been able to offer working capital to a lot of small businesses where the traditional financial services institutions just haven't been able to sort of support. And what we hear and what we see a lot is because we're able to leverage the use of that data, we have models where we can set up working capital arrangements with our consumers who, as with any business, some months you make money, some months you don't. And because we've seen their history, we can say, well, you know what, you can't afford to pay this month, that's fine. You pay when you make money again. And I think that's the power of, putting the customer first and the customer as your champion, is when you can use the assets that you have to really tailor a solution to customers that you wouldn't otherwise have been able to do without that data.
And Tom, we'll continue this data conversation, at least briefly with you on the end here. Tom Farley from the New York Stock Exchange.
Sure, thanks, David. I'm Tom Farley, president of the New York Stock Exchange, which will be 225 years old later this month. And with respect to data, I think there's nothing new under the sun. If you go back to the very earliest days of the stock exchange, the ability to analyze data in an intelligent way quickly was of paramount importance, and it was all about who had the team of runners who could run the fastest between offices, and it very quickly became who had the fastest horses and team of horses. And then in the early 19th century, some enterprising entrepreneurs figured out with telescopes and hills, you could put people about 20 miles apart, depending on the terrain, and you could pass data all the way from New York City to Philadelphia, and that became the way data was passed. In the 1870s, the telegraph came into being. In the 1880s, we dug out a letter from Thomas Edison to the stock exchange saying, hey, I've invented this new thing. It's called the ticker. I'd like to install it at the stock exchange. In the 1890s, we display a letter from Alexander Graham Bell saying, I've invented this thing called the telephone. All of these speeded the passing of data. Fast forward to the internet, and now data is passed with lasers and microwaves. So nothing has really changed. In our business, data is still of paramount importance. It's just the amount of data now that's passed that's staggering. It's not uncommon for us to have more than 10 billion, or even a multiple of that on a very busy day, messages in and out of the exchange, which we have to process and pass to various market participants.
And when you think about the evolution of data from here, how much more is it going to increase?
I mean, the title of this panel is The Future of Finance. So as I was preparing that, I was hoping there wouldn't be a follow-up question because, I mean, imagine being Alexander Hamilton, founding Bank of New York at the corner of Wall and Broad, and somebody saying, hey, Alexander, by the way, down the road, this data will be passed with microwaves and lasers. I mean, sometimes these things are out of the realm of possibility to understand. I can tell you, David, though, the curve in terms of the amount of data that's passed is actually increasing, not decreasing. And so 10 years from now, it wouldn't surprise me to see that 10, 20 billion messages be 100 times that. The mechanisms for how that will be distributed, I don't know, but that will be an important part of some entrepreneur who can figure out the best way of doing that will be very wealthy and successful.
Well, you may be right here. I don't know. You know, changing subjects a bit, Tom, I go down to the floor of the New York Stock Exchange every day. You talked briefly about its august history. There are fewer and fewer people on that floor, and frankly, and you know this, many of them who are there are not particularly busy most of the day. Some of them seem to sort of be sitting by their machines, almost kind of pets to their machines. Is that the future?
I think the issue that you described is an issue that we all have, which is the relative importance of machines and the decreasing reliance on people. Or said a different way, the number of humans per unit of whatever you're producing is going down dramatically. And the same is true for stock trading. It wasn't long ago, just a few decades ago, where the stock exchange had to shut down early on Wednesday afternoons just to process all of the necessary paperwork. And the floor was filled with 4,500 brokers that had to interface with all of the people in, say, Brian's organization. If you went to Credit Suisse 20 years ago and you went to the equity trading desk, there were traders as far as the eye can see. Now you'd have to go to a data center by and large, and you would see servers as far as the eye can see. However, I'll just add, David, that the humans are still incredibly important for us. You know, it's like the pilot on the plane. I'm okay on autopilot when everything's going smooth, but I like having a human there on takeoff and landing. And that's why we have the brokers who still come every day to the trading floor on the open, on the close, on an IPO day, or if something is unexpected, they're there to make sure that the machines and the humans are working in concert.
Yeah, although autonomous cars are now being tested, and of course they have somebody sitting in the driver's seat, but eventually they won't. Eventually, you'll just be sitting in the back seat. I mean, eventually...
It's a very dystopian, dark view you're espousing.
Why is that a dark view? We'll be able to get a lot more done in the back seat.
Well, I think, look, if you say, what does the future look like? You are going to need humans who can work with technology, who can have judgment, who can apply sound strategy. You know, if not, we might as well end this concert right now and go, we'll all go prepare a bunker. And I don't think
You don't have one?
I don't think the New York Stock Exchange is any different. In fact, I think our model of balancing humans and technology, we have it just about right.
Mike, what do you think when it comes to sort of personnel, and how do you deploy what do you have, about 1,000 people at your company?
1,000 people.
What do most of them do?
So most of them do loan operations, and what we found very interesting about our core customers, so we go after a market that's called a Henry. It's an acronym for high earner, not rich yet, but it's basically a 25 to 45-year-old that is very integrated in technology, and the expectation being that they want a pure online experience. And one of the things that we discovered very early on is they want an online experience until they don't, and then they want to call someone and have someone pick up the phone. And so while we were the first to do a loan through your mobile phone, we also get somewhere between 3,500 and 4,000 inbound calls a day into our call center from people asking questions. And we're constantly going through that, trying to figure out how we use technology to cut off those questions, but people just want to talk. And it extends all the way to, there was a point in time in February of last year where the capital markets were relatively rocky and it was taking us a little while to fund loans. People got my cell phone number and would call me up and say, where's my money? And so there's a lot of offline interaction that still happens that's necessary for a process. And you know, it's not surprising to us in hindsight, because if you look at one of our biggest comparative advantages, it's creating community. So we've had about 10% of our member base go to offline SoFi events, whether it's networking, whether it's career resources. We have dating events now, I'm sure a lot of you have heard about. They're extremely popular.
Can you say that again? You have dating events?
Dating events. SoFi members want to date SoFi members. And the two things, and I'm sorry for all the romantics out there, the two things they want to know about the other person is the FICO score and their income. So, and I can show you statistically, speaking of data, how that correlates to better relationships. So, So it's an interesting thing. As we move more and more into an online process, the value of offline, the value of the old analog interaction becomes more valuable.
But what about the value of employees? I mean, I know this has come up in a lot of the sessions today, and I don't mean to paint a dystopian future, nor do I necessarily believe there is one. But I know it's been a subject of what is the value of human labor as your business evolves?
Yeah, I think that if you take a very simple example, so outside of our business, you take the context of driverless cars, and you look at freeing up human capital that today is employed as a cab driver, a truck driver. You know, the irony of the whole Uber model is where Uber ultimately wants to go is without Uber drivers, right? That's how the economics of that business work. And so it's freeing up of human capital. It's, you know, I look at the IRS, for example. If they passed tax reform and made everything easier, think of all those great accountants that could go do something productive instead of what they do today. I'm sorry for any IRS employees that are here. So there's a tremendous opportunity to reallocate human capital. I don't think we go to the point of being layabouts and living a life of leisure as robots go and cater to our every whim. I think people will still be working, will still be innovating, but we'll be doing things that have potentially much higher societal benefit and impact than what we're doing today.
Brian, when it comes to regulation, particularly compliance, you have started down a road that would seem to indicate fewer actual human beings. I think you've described sort of an Alexa of compliance to me as a possibility, if not already a reality.
Yeah, it's definitely something we're working on and we're actually piloting now. But you know, maybe before I answer, the same argument could be made for television, commentators, around.
Yeah. All right. This ends right now. See, a machine couldn't make that joke. People even laughed.
And I also don't like how I only get questions about regulation. Just being the only bank person up here.
You're going to keep getting them, especially now. I mean, come on, you're in the penalty.
While we're airing beef. So I think, again, we discussed this earlier. One of the we actually have at Credit Suisse now more than 20 robots kind of operating within the bank, doing various functions. I think one of the cool ones is, there was a competition that the British regulator, the FCA, held around innovation earlier this year, and our team came up with something they called Reggie, which is an Alexa, a la the Amazon, tool for regulation. So it's a robot. It's a piece of technology that we loaded all the regulation into in one place. And you ask it questions the same way you would ask Alexa questions, and it spits out the appropriate regulation. So as opposed to having to go to a manual or look at a website and try to drill through all the data, we have this piece of technology that's just boiling it down to making it a lot simpler from a compliance perspective. So we're piloting now. We loaded it in the UK. We ended up winning that contest actually, so it was pretty exciting. But I think that's probably one application of what you described.
What's the feedback then on Reggie so far? Does it work? I mean, people happy with it?
It's been really good for simple questions. Once it gets more complex, you usually need to, probably get on the phone with a human. But I think our feeling is we can cut the amount of calls that go into our compliance kind of call centers down by 50% because at least half of them are kind of the basic questions that you would ask. And then I guess on your point around people, being replaced by technology, I think for us as a bank, what we've seen is you're right. There has been this move from kind of call it high touch to low touch, or the electronification of the trading markets. But so we have seen kind of certain kind of back office, middle office, even in some cases front office staff come down. But we've seen a huge explosion in technology, people, programmers, the like. So I think for us, we're actually kind of declining in terms of headcount around processing type stuff and probably ramping up in technology. But net the headcount actually hasn't come down, all that much. And I think in the end, for us, whether it's our private bank or our investment bank, clients want to talk to people, especially the institutional investors and private bank clients that we're dealing with. And so especially on the front line, I think you're always going to have that human element to it. And I would agree with Tom. You do need people to kind of direct the technology properly. I don't think it's at a point where it can be autonomous just yet.
Louise, what's your experience? Do you agree with that?
Well, I think there's different ways to think about evolution of sort of innovation, and how do we humans keep pace with that? So for example, I think there's areas where companies, especially in the financial services space, spend insane amounts of money, like compliance, like Brian was saying, where I think it's almost to the point where it's wasteful, in the sense not to do it, but just the inefficiencies that are often created globally with the way the regulations are rolled out. That I think there's a real opportunity for optimizing, not to change the outcome, but how you get there. And I think yes, that will be disruptive from how many physical bodies that maybe need to do that work. But actually, I think those people can be put into much higher skilled areas. I think, for example, at PayPal we have, what we call this recharge program, and a lot of companies in the Valley do something similar, where if you are a woman and you decide to take a career break, you can often, even just in a year or two, lose pace with technology. And so we retool you, and we help and work with you to sort of figure out how to bring your skills back to that sort of optimized level. And I think the idea that it's one or the other, I think it's too polarizing. The idea that technology therefore replaces jobs, I think yes, it does at its simplest form, but it actually creates more opportunity. And if I think about what we hear from our customers at PayPal, we're in the business of, for example, money transmission, where, when we've gone and spent time with customers, we have people who go out there and actually spend a day with somebody, even in the United States, to pay a bill or to get their sort of their check cashed. The inefficiencies in the financial systems, where some people can stand in line, in places like Indonesia for 3 hours just to get get a check cashed. I mean, that is wildly inefficient, and customers don't want to spend that sort of time. So if technology can enhance your everyday life experiences, which is what democratizing financial services is about, then I think fundamentally we have to embrace that.
To what extent is artificial intelligence playing a role, though, in what you're talking about?
Well, I think it can play a role in multiple ways. I mean, at its sort of basic form, you've got machine-to-machine learning, and I think things like customer service, in terms of how risks are sort of processed, not taking away business judgment, but I think, the example of underwriting or compliance, where you can have machines do things that really can be processed much faster and more effectively with a much better outcome for the business, so the businesses aren't wasting a lot of money sort of hedging against sort of human risks, then I think there's a real opportunity there with technology like artificial intelligence to evolve this, I think, to a space where it doesn't become, you know, this sort of scary world. I think one of the other panelists earlier mentioned, you know, where we become the pets of the robot. You know, I think there's much more sophistication, I think, in our thinking in terms of what can be done and what you still need humans to do, and that sense that you can't take away that community building or the idea that I understand and can empathize with the problems you have simply can't always be replaced with things like artificial intelligence. But it has a role in it, and I think it's responsible companies have to figure out how best to use it.
It's at the core of what you do, isn't it?
It's at the core of what we do, and I think in our case, I can say that artificial intelligence has actually created jobs in the company, because we used to make 100 signals a year. Now we make millions, and it takes a whole entourage of people to service that and to make sure it's deployed well. So the pattern with us was not job destruction, it was job creation.
How many people do you have working now?
600.
And how many of them are scientists or have their PhD in some form of science?
We have 120 PhDs.
And what are the bulk of those PhDs in?
Quantitative areas: mathematics, physics, computer science.
Do any of them actually grow up caring about stocks?
Probably very few, but they care about them now.
How many do you add each year? I mean, is it growing? Is that 120 going to be 140 next year, or?
It's been growing. We've been doubling every year for a number of years.
But I would think, isn't it a scale business? I mean, why do you need more people necessarily, even though the assets may grow and other things?
Because more people make more alphas. More alphas means more profits, and more profits means again, it goes back to more people. So it's a curve that goes like this, and we're still, at the point in the curve where we haven't reached the top.
When do we reach the top? Or
maybe in 10, 15 years.
Why?
Why? Because nothing is infinitely scalable, and everything in it has the seeds of its own peak.
Or destruction.
Destruction.
Yeah. So the more people you bring in, you're bringing in different people who may have another idea about how to write an algorithm or access a different data set or use it differently based on patterns that they would like to examine?
Yes, we thrive on diversity, on diversity of opinions. So we try to find as many people with as many different opinions as we can, people from different geographies. That's why we're in 15 different countries. So the more diversity you have, the more synergy there is between what you discover and the better you do.
Well, I want to come back to that, actually. But Mike, let me get to you and sort of talk about back to the underwriting process that you mentioned at the start of the panel, which is completely automated, so much so that you actually had to give people 15 seconds to think you're really doing something. Where does that go? Does that advance any further from here? And what is the relationship with the customer? How does that sort of advance as well?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of different directions that this evolves. I think one is moving from traditional to non-traditional underwriting data. And in particular, and there's an enormous opportunity with cell phone data to drive underwriting decisioning. And the cell phone companies are sitting on a wealth of data that's valuable, potentially more than the value that the bureaus have with the data that they have. And so I think as we begin to take advantage of some of the computing power that we have and some of the algorithms that we can build out, we're going to start discovering that some non-traditional data sources have extremely good predictive characteristics from a credit standpoint. And there's always this discussion around using your Facebook profile or your LinkedIn profile. I think that's a trivial way to think about it. although your network does have some predictive value in terms of your ability to repay debt. But certainly, things like cell data, some of your utility bill data, is some of the inputs that you have into a traditional FICO score, but being able to get them real time and get them unfiltered and raw, there's potentially much better ways to assess credit. And we've done with very simple analytics and logic and some basic machine learning, predictive modeling that runs 40% better than FICO, just off the available data that we have today. And I'd say we're in the very nascent stages of that in terms of where we're going.
In other words, people are enabling you to use that data with their permission, or just explain the chain to me there.
Yeah, so there's a little bit of a challenge that you have when you move outside of traditional underwriting, in that the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau is very clear that you can use alternative data so long as you can empirically show that it affects underwriting and credit decisions, or credit performance, I should say. But obviously you can't do that until you use the data. So you're in a little bit of a gray area in the beginning, somewhat of a chicken and egg in terms of being able to say, hey, look, I used cell phone data and it worked. It was a phenomenal predictor. But we're willing to often, as a startup, and you mentioned you're the only one who's regulated. I'm heavily regulated as well. But we're often willing to take some risk in that domain, and it's paid off in dividends for us. Just doing some non-traditional assessment of data and how it contributes to credit.
Actually, can I ask Mike a quick question?
No, you're being skipped entirely, given your earlier. Yes, of course.
I was wondering, on that non-traditional data, are the rating agencies actually starting to take that into account in their analysis?
So rating agencies have been very, very slow to look at alternative underwriting. And I remember when we started off, I mean, you know what our underwriting model is. And when we sat down and said, look, FICO's okay, but it's not the deterministic driver, it's cash flow. And we fought an uphill battle for some time. We were the first to get rated securitizations done in non-bank consumer in 2013. We were the first to get AAA in 16 and double AAA in 17. And so we've brought them along and kind of dragged them kicking and screaming into a better way of thinking about credit and risk and markets. But it's always a challenge when you want to introduce anything new. I think from a rating agency standpoint, it's a very asymmetric response to adopt to something new, because if it works, it worked. If it doesn't, everyone loses their job. So you create that kind of agency problem, and it creates some resistance to using data.
Do the regulators, can they keep up in general? I mean, the rating agencies, I understand, are not really a regulator, certainly not in that sense, but they are part of that process.
Yeah, I think the rating agencies and the regulators are struggling desperately to keep up. And I think that the industry is moving so fast that I don't know how they do it. And in fact, in a lot of ways, I don't think they do it. And the banks face significant costs from a regulatory burden standpoint. We went to one of the big banks in the U.S. and we said, look, we could originate loans for you cheaper than it costs you to originate loans. In fact, substantially cheaper. We could cut huge amounts of your regulatory costs, huge amounts of your infrastructure, your branch cost, your personnel cost. And I remember I was having this conversation with the head of consumer banking, which probably wasn't the right person to talk about this to. And he looked at me and said, if I do this, I'll have to fire 50,000 people. And I said, well, yeah, you'll get higher ROE. And he said, well, then what am I going to do? And I, of course, was being a jerk, and I said, learn to code. And so the industry, not just the regulators or rating agencies, but I think the incumbents in the industry are struggling to keep up.
What's going to happen to those 50,000 people eventually?
I think you're going to have a wholesale change in how financial services works. I think the old model, the 300,000 person bank doesn't exist. I don't think it needs to exist, and I don't think that's what people want anymore. I don't think people want the branch delivery network. They want online. They still want call centers. They want to be able to access people. But
right. I mean, you said earlier that people still want that human connection.
Yeah, but they want it on their own terms, and they want it when they want it. And one of my favorite things that I do when I talk about SoFi is I'll go and I'll dial our 1-800 number, which again, we're an online presence. We have no physical branch, so you don't think of us as a call center. But I'll dial our number and I'll dial any one of the top 10 bank numbers concurrently, and I'll just put the phones side by side, and we will pick up instantaneously while I listen to some very pleasant hold music on the other one for a long period of time. People want speed, convenience, transparency, alignment. And you don't need, the branch is not a channel to deliver that.
Tom, regulation, obviously an important part of what you do as well. There are certain constituencies as well in the political establishment that would not want to see you, and not that you're going to eliminate any more jobs on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange, the same way perhaps that person that Mike just mentioned might not want to get rid of 50,000 people. What role does it play? Are they keeping up, or are they retarding progress?
Let me just address something Mike said,
Sure.
Related to your question, but and maybe disagree a little bit with him, which I do with great trepidation, because someday I want to convince him when he has this fabulously successful IPO to, of course, do so on the NYSE. So I don't want to.
You've already started.
I don't want to annoy him. I actually think the regulators are keeping up fine. You know, in this day and age, there's a good deal of crowdsourcing, what with whistleblower rewards and the sophisticated technology of market participants. The regulators are the benefit of a lot of inbound information. So even if their systems aren't quite sophisticated enough, and I would agree that they are not, they are getting access to really important information at the right time. The reason why I make that point is that my concern is, if that's not the prevailing view at the regulator, then they'll do what we're seeing all too often, which is, hey, industry, stop innovating. We can't keep up with you. You know, even looking at Mike's business, wow, this, you know, originating these loans using technology, whoa, slow down, I can't keep up. Whereas I actually think they should take the view of, no, let's go ahead, let 1,000 flowers bloom and espouse innovation, and trust that there is enough crowdsourcing and a minimal level of technology at the government level to be able to protect investors. And I do think they're doing a good enough job of that today. So I didn't directly answer your question. I'm happy to, but otherwise I'll yield.
Well, you kind of did, but I mean, so your sense in terms of the regulatory regime that you're under at the NYSE is that it's appropriate and that it's keeping up with the advances in the business?
Yeah, so in our world, just those of you who aren't into the kind of nuances of stock trading, there's a dual track regulatory program where each of the exchanges, so the New York Stock Exchange, for example, operates its own regulatory program. It's almost like a quasi-governmental role where we actually surveil our markets, we conduct investigations, and we bring enforcement cases, large settlements, we'll kick people out of our markets, we'll delist securities. And then the SEC sits on top of us, they regulate us. Sometimes they'll cherry pick the bigger cases, they'll take those, other times they'll pass us cases. And this works quite well because the exchanges themselves, and not just us, our competitors as well, have very sophisticated technology. They're able to much better keep up with the latest innovations of trading. And so I do feel it's appropriate. And I think that's fairly widespread view at the moment, David, where you can trust that our markets, while not perfect, are considered the safest, most deep liquid in the world.
Louise, regulators keeping up in the payments business?
Well, yeah, I think just to add and build onto the point here, you know, it's very easy, I think, to sort of say you know, you could sit back and say, well, the regulators don't get it, or they're not as sort of sophisticated as we are. But actually, I think a lot of them have become more sophisticated. But you know, the way I look at it, if you are a customer champion company, then you need to embrace those regulators, and you need to educate them, and you need to partner with them, because you'll get left behind. And I think that is the bottom line with regulators, because they will just come out and, you know, as he was saying, just, you know, sort of stifle innovation otherwise. My experience with the regulators in our space has been quite progressive, actually, and they've wanted to work with us to understand, you know, there isn't one size that fits all in the financial services. So a solution for, you know, one of the banks or for the credit card companies may have a chilling effect on our business. So we make sure that we kind of get in there and really spend the time to say, well, I see why this might work for them, but here's why it wouldn't work for us. And it takes a lot of iteration and a lot of working, but I think building that trust and building that and that, you know, connection, regulators aren't going away, and nor frankly do we want them. They're there to protect the consumers, and I think, you know, I think embracing that relationship is something that I think will serve well a lot of companies. But if I can ask a question, if I can.
Am I doing that better, John?
You're doing pretty good, but I just want to ask, I want to bring back this customer service question because, you know, while I do agree with Mike that, you know, the sort of the idea of a customer and my own experience is, you know, I want to be able to get the answers I need to get at my convenience. But I want to challenge the view, or maybe it's sort of not a heartfelt sort of view around what do you really want to call into a call center anymore? Like, I have to gear myself up physically. Like, I have to guile myself to call a customer service center versus you know, if I can find the information at my fingertips, I want that. And so I'm curious, Mike, whether you think that, you know, the face of customer service is actually going to become less human because that's, you know, what a lot of our consumers are sort of saying today.
Yeah, so I think if you look at measures like Net Promoter Score, and I don't know how many of you are familiar with Net Promoter Score, but the way that it works is when you get a product from a vendor, they ask you on a score of 0 to 10, how likely are you to recommend this to a friend? And 0 to 6, you get a negative 100. 7 and 8, you get 0. And 9 and 10, you get 100. And to put this in context, I think the top 4 banks have a combined Net Promoter Score somewhere between negative 15 and negative 45. I think used car dealers are at about 25. So you can put some context in terms of how people perceive about service. So your view that you cringe when you have to dial the customer service number is because you have a horrible experience when you dial the customer service number, right? And the reality is there's an opportunity to make that a really good experience. And it's not just a good experience in terms of delivering an extremely ecstatic fulfillment of that call, getting someone to come out of that and saying, hey, I had a great experience, I feel so happy about my decision to go with SoFi. We run Net Promoter Scores between 70 and 90 across what we do, and a lot of that's rooted in the call center. But it also creates an opportunity to build that engagement and build that relationship. And whether that's to talk about an incremental product, whether it's to guide someone through a complicated process, there's an enormous amount of first order benefit in terms of referral and second order benefit in terms of reviews and so forth that you get out of having that physical premise. And so you're always trying to figure out how do you create a situation where someone doesn't have to call in. But you know, within our structure, as I said, 3,500 to 4,000 calls a day, and I sit on the floor and I listen to them, and they're very interesting, fascinating, legitimate calls. You know, one of the ones that we used to get a lot was when we would reject people after the 15-second timer. They'd call up and say, "Why did I get rejected?" And we were very concerned from a regulatory standpoint. We obfuscated the reason why we would decline someone, and what we've done now is not only do we give you total transparency as to why we declined you, we say, hey, you've got a cable bill from 12 months ago that you never paid, and it's a drag on your credit record, and we can't do the loan. But we also show them, but you can remedy this, right? You can actually go and pay that bill off and come back in a month, and your credit report will be clean, and we can finance you. And so, you know, being able to take what are traditional frustrating experiences and interaction with a financial services institution and turning that into a positive experience where you feel like you got some value out of it and you feel like you've got some alignment with the firm, you know, those are huge wins.
And so, I mean, you believe that relationship between the customer and a person on the other end of a phone or whatever device it is that they're using to actually communicate is going to remain an important one for your company.
So it's very important. So I can tell you, we did an experiment that we ended up keeping because it performed so well. When we disperse a personal loan, unsecured consumer loan to someone, we call up and we talk to you. And we say, we're about to release the money, just want to make sure you're going to pay us back. And you will be amazed at how much impact that had on credit performance. Nothing else, no underwriting, no data, no analytics, simply just calling someone and saying, hey, we're about to give you your money, you're gonna pay us back, right? Had a huge impact on performance. So yeah, I think there's enormous value in still having that analog interaction.
You know, I was gonna say the interesting thing, and just, you know, feeling the need to defend the banks a little bit, is that despite that poor kind of service score, I'm going to screw up the statistic, but there's some statistic out there that 90% of the people never change their bank, right? Because it's just too painful, and you know, every bank is as painful as the next one. So people don't change, and I think it's up to the banks to actually figure out how to solve that and actually make the user experience better before we kind of lose that, that loyalty, so to speak, that we have. And ultimately, I think my view is that, that the market, at least for, investment banking and trading in terms of what we do is going to go two directions, extreme kind of high touch and then continued trend towards low touch. Because there's just some things that you buy on Amazon and there's some things that you go to the store for. So I think that the banks need to figure out, which one is which and then service the heck out of the stuff that you come there in person for or want that personal experience with before we kind of lose this, stickiness of the customer that we currently have.
In the less than 10 minutes we have left, in terms of speaking about the future, and let me start with you, Brian, back to the sort of the basics of your business and how you see it changing. Capital formation, how you go about amassing pools of capital or how you go about and deciding how to deploy them. Is that going to change in a meaningful way? It doesn't appear to have really changed significantly over the last, the technology underlying it can, but at the same time, the process seems very similar. Will it change?
I think that's right. I think it's the process that's changing. I think in the end, the way we bring companies to the capital markets, the way clients trade, I think in the end, that'll largely be the same. I think the data, I think somebody said earlier that it's a bit of a blessing and a curse. I definitely agree with that view. I think one of the things we see with so much data being out there now is that the market's extremely efficient and that it's very one way. So everybody has the same view because they're staring at the same data. There's not this divergence of opinion that we used to see in the past. Every time I see the market moving this way, one of the things I think about is like when you use Waze, when there's a car accident and you decide you want to Waze your way out of it, and it sends you a different route, but everybody's using Waze and using the same direction, so you end up stuck in a traffic jam the way Waze took you. So I was like, somebody needs to invent a way that is maybe not as fast as what Waze is, like second fastest or third fastest, but it's not the first option that everybody's using on Waze, right? And I think, I don't know if that made sense or not, but
I'm working on it.
In my head, it made sense.
Yeah.
But I think in some ways, the way the market trades this data, I think it's the same thing. I think everybody says, okay, this is what the data shows to you, whether it's an economic report or some piece of flow data, and that's what this means. And in the end, everybody rushes into the same trade, and you don't see anybody on the other side. So that second, third, fourth standard deviation around that, I think, is going to be where the alpha is created. From the more active, investment community once everybody gets their arms around the whole thing.
You agree with that? That's what you're in business to do, I would assume, right? We talked earlier, you talked about we're in the age of prediction. Variables are becoming more predictable, but the world less so.
Yeah, well, this is what we think, that generally, for any particular item, if you hold any particular item and you want to predict it, there's more and more data available for that item. So it's becoming more and more predictable. So from that point of view, the world is becoming, every individual thing that you can think of is becoming more and more predictable. And there are some ramifications if you think about that. Going in the opposite direction is the fact that the world is becoming more and more complicated. And it's more and more difficult to put the pieces together. So the role of technology in making the predictions is getting amplified, because either you can make sense of all this information or you can't. And if you can, you'll be on top of things. And if you can't, well, I'm not sure. And that's why we're calling this the age of prediction. It was the age of big data, but it's really, not about the big data. It's about what information, what intelligence you can glean from the big data, and what you can predict about it, what you can predict about the future from the data.
Tom, to Brian's point in terms of capital formation, the IPO process, it's great theater on the New York Stock Exchange floor. We love it. Should it change? And why hasn't it for what is really now a very long period of time?
I think we and I have a luxury in that our business, at least the core objectives of our business, aren't really changing. If you look elsewhere in finance, you look at active money managers as an industry, or even the broker-dealer community as an industry. not only is there a lot of change in the underlying technology and process, but the actual objectives of the businesses kind of have to change in order to thrive and survive. But as an exchange, our twin goals are to help men and women with great ideas raise dough and use that to go make the world a better place. That's capital raising. And then because those investors wouldn't give them money if they didn't think they could then sell it back and get their money back in their pocket, we operate a secondary market for trading securities. And that's really it. It's really simple. It's been the same thing for 225 years. Specifically with request to your question, which is, boy, that IPO process hasn't changed too much. It actually has changed to the benefit of the consumer. They are less expensive overall. The IPO process is less expensive overall. The information that's shared by companies that are going public is not only more comprehensive, but more immediate and more widely disclosed to the investing public. And so I don't think it's fair to say that, and I'm not sure you even said this per se, but I don't think it's fair to say it really hasn't changed or hasn't evolved. In terms of looking forward over the next 20 years, the only thing for certain is that it will be even less expensive and it will be even more efficient. But I suspect there will still be a formalized process for companies joining the public markets, because not everyone is an Uber or an Airbnb or a very, very sophisticated company with a sophisticated CFO and a legal team that can just kind of jump into being a public company. A lot of companies are run by entrepreneurs who have never had anything to do with the public market. And so having a formalized process aided by firms such as Brian's is a helpful and useful endeavor, not only for them, but for investors.
And Louise, in terms of your business, I mean, is the day here already, or when will it be here when I can pay for anything from anywhere to anyone on anything I want?
We're pretty much there. I think there's, I think with the advent of mobile, and I was in the mobile technology industry before I came into the financial services industry, so I definitely see the convergence of those two worlds. I think with the advent of mobile and what you can do on mobile, I think there's really becoming less places where you can't use your digital capabilities to pay for anything, anytime, any day.
And finally, I'll turn back to you. My final words in terms of the relationship between the consumer and their banking institution. You said at the very beginning, you sort of are focused on the millennial, like a 25 to 35-year-old. How is that, in your opinion, going to change from here?
So I think that you're going to get somewhat of a reversion back to an older financial model that was a lot more community-based and a lot more interactive. And so kind of the irony of all the discussion we've had around data and automation and machine learning and so forth, one of the things that we found that's extremely valuable in building relationships is what we do offline with our members. And I think you're going to get more offline integration around this concept of alignment with that generation, that you'll see more and more traditional financial services models try to adopt that approach and build a stickier engagement into the 35-year-old than they have today.
So people are going to be seeking community.
Seeking community. People like community. And the beauty, the one benefit of technology is you can define community, you can define affinity across multiple dimensions. It doesn't have to be geography anymore. It can be the school that you went to. It can be the company you work for. It can be, a common interest that you have. But you can define affinity in any way that drives the community that you want to be part of.
Well, that's a nice, hopeful place to stop, so I think we will. Thank you all, and thank you all in the audience as well for joining us.